Greetings everyone and welcome back to the second video of Codemesh. I'm Jisung with a new background, and today we're going to talk about something called linear regression. From our last video we learned two types of AI, which is regression and classification. Regression was something that we put in the inputs to find the correlation of the outputs, which is going to be our y-axis, and classification were those where we classify the outputs in different groups or different clusters to see if a new coming data is incorporated in any of these clusters. And as it is in its name, linear regression is a type of regression and the most basic form of regression we need to know. And to say that you know something about regression, definitely you need to know a lot more about linear regression. First, to understand linear regression, we need a data set. Now, the one you can see here is a data set made out of x and y, where y is the one that we're trying to predict, and x is the value that we're using to predict y. And in each data set, there's going to be different data points, where each data point will consist of a single x and a single y. And once we plot them out, we will see something like this. Now, a linear regression system tests different kind of linear functions over this graph. If it's horizontal, data horizontal. If it's a linear line with a slope of maybe 3, they try it. If it's a linear line of slope maybe 5, they try it. So they try multiple values, infinitely many values of different linear segments to see the best fitting line. And in this case, the best fitting line is shown in green, which is eventually going to be the model we're using. And how do we know if this is the best fitting line? Well, the program looks at the difference between the actual y values of each data point and the difference between the actual y value and the predicted y value of the same data point. The sum of these differences will be the minimum, or we say optimized, will be optimized at the best fitting line. Since the explanation might have not been so straightforward, I got a good visual demonstration of how linear regression works. So on this cardboard, you can see a drumstick connected to different strands of cords here, right? And right now the cords are very loose. We can see that the distance between each data point, we have 4 data points currently, each data point and the trend line, which is the drumstick, the distance between them are not optimized. Now, I have these cords all strangled down here, and once I pull this, see what happens. Once I pull this, you can see that the distance between each data point and the trend line, which is the drumstick, is minimized. In other words, it's optimized, right? In this way, we find the best trend line between a set of data points, which is going to be a part of our data set, where the linear regression is going to be the trend line, which is also the drumstick, as I said. Yeah, so generally, as a part of the demonstration, linear regression is where you're going to minimize the distance between the trend line and each data point. Now, hopefully you might have understood how linear regression works. Let's move on to Codemesh to see how you can code this out. Okay, so as always, you're going to log into the Codemesh workspace, which is the black grid you see here. And we're going to import datasets, modify the dataset, and use regression, then train the entire model to determine some accuracies here. First, we're going to pull the dataset node here, and we're going to use Boston Housing in this case. Now, the reason why we're using Boston Housing is because Boston Housing is a dataset that's specialized to regression, not classifications. So it means that the data points that are in the Boston Housing dataset is only for regression, not for classification. We're not classifying anything through those data points. We're only regressing stuff that we can correlate a certain value between the y that we're trying to predict and the x we're trying to use, and use that later as a part of the AI model. And we're going to do some explanatory data analysis, which for now, I'm just going to put some values I already know. We're going to swap the NAM values into mean, which is going to be the mean of all of the other values that are in the same column, and target is the Y value we're trying to predict. And for Boston housing, that's going to be a column named MEDV, all in capital. And then we're going to pull regression here. And for default, it's chosen as linear regression, so you do not need to change anything here. And then you're going to put training and end the model by connecting the regression node and the training node. Now I'm going to run this model to see the accuracy. And in this case, you can see that the terminal is giving us a mean squared error of 21.818. Well, I'd say that's a decent value for Boston housing because a mean squared error value under 30 for Boston housing is pretty good, which is is also feasible for any other feature uses for the same model. And just for the sake of better understanding, let's have a look at the actual code of the workflow we just made. So if you click the blue button that is on the right top corner of the Codemesh workspace, you'll be able to export the model in Python code. And if you put that in any type of ID, in this case I'm using something called Colab, C-O-L-A-B, you'll be able to browse the entire code of what you made just before. Right now we can see different cells. We call these little chunks as cells. And you can see that for the first one, we are importing the data, which is named as housingdata.csv. In this case, that's going to be the Boston housing data. And then we are importing some necessary libraries. In this case, we're using Python syntax. So everything should obey something that is feasible and interpretable in Python. For now, we are importing a function called linear regression from a library called sklearn.linearModel. And by the way, if you need to follow on throughout by typing or something, please do, so that you can better understand how to code out these by yourself without the help of Codemesh, of course, later, but I think it's always a good idea to practice it on a daily basis. And these other stuff I'm going to explain just in a second. Moving on to the third cell, what we're doing here is we are filling the NA, which is also another name for NaN values, which I said are the values that are just blank. It's not zero, it's just blank. There's nothing in there. We're going to fill these NaN values with the mean of the other values in the same column. Okay? And then we're moving on. We're collecting the medv column data and putting into another object called y. And we're doing the same for x, but we're collecting all the data except for medv. In this case, we're using a attribution called drop from data, right? Drop means literally dropping that column. So we have the entire data, and only by dropping the medv column, we're going to acquire the columns that are not in the medv column, right? If we say we have like 24 different columns in data set and we drop medv, well, x is now going to have like 23 columns, right? And medv is going to be our y value, which means that for x, we are using all of the other columns as the independent variable to correlate with the dependent variable, which is going to be medv. And then we're doing a train test split, which is going to be the last training node in our workflow. In this case, we are collecting a test size of 0.3, which means that you are putting out 30% of the data set, which is going to be the data here. We're putting out 30% of the data set for testing for later and only using 70% of the data set to train the model. And then you're going to do a linear regression just like this and predicting some data, which in this case is going to be the X test, which we're predicting some data from the testing set, not the training set. And then we are looking at the predicted Y value and the tested Y value, comparing their differences to determine the mean squared error. So overall, the main aches you need to understand in linear regression is going to be minimizing the gap between the actual value on data point and the predicted value on a trend line whereas the trend line is going to have the minimum value of those sum of the differences. And that trend line is going to be used in other models where, well, I'll say just a model, and we're going to put different data points later, the x values, of course, to predict y values for the corresponding x values. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll find you guys later with a new topic about KNN, which is going to be our first classifying model. Thank you.